Hello and welcome to the Mind Manifesting Podcast. I'm here with my guest, Karel Teifer, and his wonderful daughter, Agnes.
This is Agnes Lucia.
Agnes Lucia. Welcome, my friends. Today, we're getting into the topic of fatherhood and abundance. Me and Karel are both new fathers. I'm actually a father for the second time over, and Karel is for the first time stepping into the role of fatherhood. So Karel, I'd like to start this podcast by setting the intention that our work be in service of the highest good.
Man.
Here's the passage I wanted to get your thoughts on. So this is from this book here, You Were Born Rich by Bob Proctor, who's one of my mentors, not a mentor in person, but a mentor in spirit. You must begin to understand that the present state of your bank account, your sales, your health, your social life, your position at work, etc., your relationships is nothing more than the physical manifestation of your previous thinking. If you sincerely wish to change or improve your results in the physical world, you must change your thoughts, and you must change them immediately. If you take the time to really think through the information which is being presented, you will conclude that what has just been said makes perfect sense. In fact, anyone who truly understands the creative process will tell you that what I have just said is not only right, but is the natural law of your being. It is the way God works with and through the individual. It is also called prayer in some circles, prayer being the movement that takes place between spirit and form, with and through the individual. God has given you the ability to build any idea which you desire. You were born rich, and your abundance is contained in thought. So be good to yourself, choose magnificent ideas, and cease permitting your physical world to control your thinking. Thoughts?
So I definitely think that through our consciousness and through our spiritual intentions and thoughts in general, we are partnering in the creation of reality very directly, which backs up the sort of the spirit of what that was saying, I think. But I also would say, that it's a partnership, as I understand it, and that while you have tremendous creative capacity, and that we say that that's what it means when in Genesis it says that humans are created in the image of God, in the divine image, that we are creators and we have the ability to participate in that process. But like I say, it's all in partnership with other humans and in partnership with the divine. And so I think that the way in which our thoughts are able to bring us these things is also to some degree mediated by our partners in that process. So I would agree, but on a collective level, maybe I think also not just an individual level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to understand when you start getting to thinking about your thoughts becoming reality in this way, is that it is there are many players on the stage, so you can't expect to necessarily be the director of all the players, but you do, I feel, have a tremendous amount of say as to what your sort of how you play your role.
Right. It's very difficult to think somebody else's thoughts, but in terms of your own, you can do a lot with them. but then there's also this question, a little bit of how one is able to direct one's thoughts and one's intentions. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the great Hasidic masters said that anybody who tells you that they have a remedy for unwanted thoughts arising in your mind while you're praying is lying to you. As in, like,
Mhm.
at some point, yeah, you're gonna have some, I'm trying to focus on my relationship with God, and instead I'm thinking about, football. Not really. I don't really think about football, but something totally unrelated, something that just doesn't have a place in what you're trying to achieve here. And nevertheless, like, the thought comes up because it's something you're interested in general, or it's something you want on a physical level that is not necessarily a spiritual desire. Um, use your
Mhm.
imagination, but this idea of sometimes you're going to have thoughts that you didn't want to have. So uh, what to do about that, I think, is also a question. Now that we were saying how we're thinking is really important. Okay, so what do we do with the wrong thoughts, or not necessarily the wrong thoughts, but the out of place thoughts? Uh, and
Yeah,
how directly in
absolutely.
control of that are we is also a thing, or maybe it's the way in which we react to that in the moment and then conditions us later to put that thought in a different place. But in terms of a complete utter remedy to not having any out of place thoughts, I think this guy is correct that you just can't do that.
Mhm.
It's always the sort of
Yeah, I think anybody living in a human body would agree with that if they're honest with you.
right.
Yeah, my perspective about it is that, the discipline or the practice is that of persistently bringing your focus back to what you are creating, and aligning yourself with your values, and you know yeah, just constantly refocusing, as opposed to locking in your energy, your attention on those negative thoughts and giving them more and more and more attention,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
you can manifest in either direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of illness, a lot of like physical and mental disease or disharmony comes from a persistent focus and attention on those, let's say, negative thoughts, unwanted thoughts. Hello again. And babies, for instance, are completely wide open with their subconscious mind. So even
Oh
the thoughts and the feelings that we're having around them are being directly transferred to them.
yeah. Yeah. They're incredibly. I don't know. It's amazing. The way her consciousness is just expanding from day to day, from moment to moment. Yesterday we discovered her love for psytrance, which makes sense because of how fast her consciousness is expanding, right? I mean, like, there's something to that, like, that just, like, holy cow, the intense awareness that's pouring in with in at a level I may not have ever had before, and that sort of, like, that trance beat being the soothing thing that carries you through it, the thing to focus on that allows you to very cool stuff. But I digress.
That's funny. We have not tried out the psytrance on our little one yet.
She loved it. We could see she was, like,
Interesting.
anticipating the beat drop. She'd get all. It's so formulaic, that's so, like, predictable. Oh, okay, here's the part where the beat's about to drop, and, like, she got it after, like,
Mhm.
half an hour of listening to that stuff. She was really, like, excited when the beat dropped. Great.
That's great. That's a beautiful vision there.
Yeah. But
Yeah, so thoughts on that idea of, like, uh, focusing on the, let's say, quote, positive or negative thoughts, and how much creative control we have within that.
well, it's a really good question. I think that, like I say, the way one navigates. Aw, guy off my shoulder. So there's this idea in the Talmud that uh, it says everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. And when we say fear in this context, we don't mean like, sort of like mortal terror or something like that, that you're afraid, heaven's going to smite you or something like that. It's a word that sometimes gets translated as awe, but one of my teachers put it this way. That feeling, you're sitting in your room and you think you're alone and you're like doing whatever you're doing, and then all of a sudden you realize that there's been somebody in this room with you the whole time and they've been watching everything you do. That sort of jolt you get, you're like, oh, oh my God, that is the kind of fear that this word implies, when fear of heaven. And so what does that mean in this context? It's like, well, you might not be able to control exactly which thoughts arise, but you can control what your response to that is going to be, and how you're going to apprehend it, especially this apprehension, this feeling of oh my God, that jump that is full of reverence for the observer, saying like, I'm giving part of myself to the fact that I'm being watched. There's like a respect for the other. Like, why is it that you feel a sort of fear? It's like, well, maybe I did something that the other wouldn't have appreciated, something the other wouldn't have liked. So that idea of being watched, I mean, whether you believe in like a deity who can see all your actions and see all your thoughts and whatever, or whether you just understand that you exist in community with other people, I think the real essence of a negative thought is one that's going to be destructive to the world. Like we said, that the higher good, not just the self, but the ones you're partnering with in that work of creation. So what are really the desires we should try to sort of curtail are the ones that are going to get in the way of that collective partnership of creation. So back to what does it mean that you can be in control of your fear of heaven? You can evaluate that respect for the whole with the things that you look at, because your ego is always going to try to associate all of your thoughts with the self and what the self wants. So if there's something that you want that's not good for the whole, you're still going to just, your ego will own it and say, well, like, that's my good and I still want it. But once you sort of pull the camera back and you make it about the other as well, that sort of conditions that. I think that might be a strategy to use to redirect those things, just allowing yourself to have that moment of reverence about your own thoughts and what they mean for others, even if others can't see your thoughts. You can be the one watching them on their behalf.
Yeah, and that essential question of, is this creative or is it destructive? Is it in service of the highest good, or is it pushing against the highest good?
Right, and I think also this idea of is it in partnership or is it against that? It's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's been a big mental shift for me, in the last 5 years, 3.5 years in particular, since we had our first daughter, is like, just kind of having this understanding that I was in the habit of being able to live a fairly self-centered life for a long time. And now all of a sudden, certain actions that I would have easily taken and thought nothing of in the past are now not only affecting myself, but also my wife and also my children. So it's taken it's been a big mental shift that I'm still in the process of doing, but it's really made me a lot healthier and a lot happier in my own body and mind as well, because I had a lot of bad habits that I was I was justifying because, I had the thought that they were only affecting me, but I suppose when you expand out with this vision that we're looking through, that's not really an accurate way to think about it. Self-destruction is,
Sure.
in a sense, destructive towards the whole, even if
Right.
nobody else is around to see it.
And that's absolutely the case. But none of this is to say that the self isn't still worthy of the things that it needs for itself. So like,
Of course.
as
Yeah.
long as it's, I mean, that's, these things need to be in complete balance and harmony with each other. The self shouldn't be neglected either, because then you're that's also, that's exactly as we say, where self-destruction is the destruction of the group. The self-neglect is part of that as well.
Mhm.
All about,
Yeah, and
about
the fundamental needs of my wife and children, one of their needs is for me to be healthy and happy and to be pursuing my passion and purpose in life,
exactly.
and vice versa. I need them to be doing that and not to be kind of like suffering away in the in the day-to-day repetition of what life can sometimes feel like.
Precisely. Yeah, it's the idea of individuation and the idea of acting for the collective only really seem contradictory from certain points of view, but really they're, when both are expressed, it's exactly harmonious, exactly as it should be.
Mhm.
They require each other, just as you said. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. They are one and the same. Do you have any good, you know, quotes or stories about that relate to that exact concept that come to mind?
Um, about the work for the group and the work for the individual coming together.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
Good question. Come back to that one.
Okay.
Let me think
Let's
about
get
it.
into the let's get into our topic of, I mean, we've been into it, but the concept of stepping into your fatherhood, and I'd like to look at that through the lens of your faith, and just hear a little bit about your experience in the last couple months.
Oh, that's pretty vast. I mean, uh, I guess if you want to start from the most like mundane level of what my faith has to do with my baby, well, the Torah kind of commanded me to have one, at
Mm,
least potentially
okay.
more.
Well,
But
that's interesting.
yeah, no, there's a commandment that we follow, or I guess not all of us, obviously, but there's a commandment that Orthodox Jews believe in, that you're supposed to have children. Um, so just
Mhm.
starting off there. Um, I mean,
What is
if
that
you ask
commandment
why,
exactly?
it says be fruitful and multiply. So that's how we interpret it. And the sages say that
Yeah.
the law is that a man has the obligation to have at least one son and at least one daughter. Um,
Mm. Yes.
so interestingly, the Jewish law doesn't obligate women in the same way, and there's a question as to why. Um, Certainly, like it takes two to tango, but um,
Yeah.
we don't make somebody do something that's inherently dangerous for them.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout history, it's been very dangerous to bear children. So um,
Right.
nevertheless, I mean, obviously, it's still considered like the fulfillment of be fruitful and multiply. If a woman does have children, she's still participating
Mm-hmm.
in that aspect of it. So the question is like, okay, so it's commanded. So what? I mean, it's obvious like having children is a good thing to do. Why do we have to be commanded in it? And I think the idea is that the things we're commanded to do are activities that are in a different category than all the other activities of our lives. Um, it's one thing to go to work, and I think I do good things at work. I think I help people through my line of work, but it's different from um, spiritual activity. I'm not saying that there's something ethically higher or better or whatever. Obviously, you can do ethical things that fall outside of these categories, like going to work, helping people out there. Although theoretically, you're commanded to do stuff like that. Let's put that aside. The idea of a commandment, we call it in Hebrew a mitzvah, is the root of it. The root of the word is related to the idea of connection, like yoke things together. Which, interestingly enough, yoke, the English word yoke, is etymologically connected to the Sanskrit word yoga. It's all Indo-European, right? So yoga is to unite two things together. In that case, I guess in the case of the yoga we're used to with the body, it's the mind and the body understanding that they're not separate. So mitzvah is like that too. That's our word for like a yoke. It's a yoga. These things that we are commanded in are the ways that we realize all kinds of unions. We're always trying to. We're always seeking the one, trying to make things one. The word monotheism in Arabic is tawhid, which means making one. I think it's a very beautiful way to understand it. We're always trying to make things one. Okay, so it says in the Bible that that a husband and wife shall become one flesh, which means having a baby. So that's one kind of becoming one. But there's also like this is the world now, right? This is the one unique point. In this world, there's like inside and outside, and there's like strangers and neighbors, and there's mother and father, but there's only one of these. I mean, I know you've got two babies, but from their perspective, they're still the whole world, right? They're still at that level where they haven't really entered into that partnership yet. Kind of have to come of age to really start, which isn't to say that they're not practicing, but I think part of what growing up is learning how to work together and how to understand that there is another. And I think at the beginning, especially at the very beginning, she barely has an understanding of self at all. She has no ego. Certainly doesn't have a real grasp of the concept of other. And so when I try to relate to that amazing infinite oneness, just stunned, the eternity, right? So these mitzvahs are a way of getting us closer to that oneness. And she's a part of that. So I guess we can start there. But
great, beautiful. Yeah, that's why I threw out that broad question to you, because I was interested to see. I figured you could riff on it pretty eloquently, and I would say that you did. Thank you.
Thank you. But there's so much more. I mean, the naming her. We say in Judaism that that there are only a few measures of prophecy left in the world, right? You see all kinds of prophets all the time. Prophecy is a very rare thing these days. It says it's given to children and madmen. And then there's like a few other cases where people get little glimpses of it. But one of the times that prophecy enters the world is when a parent names a child. That there's something about your name that's a little bit prophetic. And when your parents choose that, they're really channeling something very deep. And
wow.
So naming her was definitely a profound spiritual experience. Like with that awareness of like,
I'd love to get into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You told me her name meaning, and I'd love to hear about it here.
Yeah. So her government name, we've got a tradition of having a secular name and a Jewish name, Hebrew name. So her secular name is Agnes Lucia. So my grandmother's sister was Agnes, and that's why she's named Agnes. And Lucia is well, my father's mother was named my father's mother was named Clara, but we didn't want to name our kid Clara. So Lucia is a very similar meaning. It means light, like Clara means light
Mhm.
in French. But also it means that our baby and Amy have the same initials. So that's very nice.
Mhm. Great.
So there's that
And
continuum.
Agnes, there's some meaning connected with Agni as well that you told me of.
Yeah. So Agnes means pure or holy in Greek, and it has had both meanings because Greek is a very old language that's been used in a number of ways. But yeah, through that Indo-European chain, like that connects yoga and yoga, you've got Agnes in Greek, or Hagne, that's how they say it in Greek, and Agni, which is this Vedic fire deity over in India. That fire being that purifying holy light, sort of a
Mhm.
conduit to the other side. They would pass sacrifices through the fire that would go to the other place. So yeah, some powerful light, holy light names.
Yeah, very much so.
But her Hebrew name is Bruria Miriam. Bruria was pretty much the only named female sage in the Talmud. There are a lot of great stories about her
Mhm.
wisdom, and her name means
Mhm.
Bruria means the clarification of God, or the
Wow.
yeah the explanation.
Clarification of God.
Yeah, so berur is like a clarification or even an explanation. Yeah, but it also has
Mm.
the root word or, which means light in Hebrew. So the one who sheds light. Uh, uh, yeah. Or it could be the clarity.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And then
So,
Miriam is my grandmother's name. So and she was a prophetess in the Torah, Moses' sister. So Bruria Miriam is her Hebrew name.
mhm. So we're looking at a young sage here, young female sage.
Yeah, Bruria
Sage
is
in training.
a big name, a very wise name. So I
Mhm.
hope the prophecies are all fulfilled in this little one.
I can imagine that they will be with you guys as parents. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you got me thinking that the naming of a child is a prophecy. I really like that concept, and I'm not going to go too deeply into my family and our current dynamic, but that's definitely got me thinking about our daughter's name is Coral Rose, and obviously both of our names, and our son is named Forest Sun. And it's interesting to see, just even at this like very young age, how kind of accurate and descriptive those names are turning out to be in terms of their personalities. So I won't go into a tremendous amount of detail about that, but it's definitely there's a lot of accuracy there. So that's interesting. And it's like we felt that we had no choice but to give them those names too. It was just like, well,
Yeah.
here's the name. Like,
Yeah, we talked about all kinds of names, and when those came up, it was just like we just both felt it. Like, yeah, no, that's it. That's right. And you just know. But and then I think there's also
wonderful.
the aspect of like as we grow up, we build our identities partially around our name. It's like
Yeah,
the thing people
absolutely.
call you. And back to the idea of the universe being made out of thought and consciousness. The building blocks of that we use are really linguistic. We
Mm,
identify things by name, and then those names have intense power, or even something like
yeah.
mundane, but you get up to something like the name of a human, a specific human.
Mm,
Big deal.
it's a big deal. It's a very important prophecy. And I
Yeah.
love that concept, thinking about the words as building blocks for consciousness for reality. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of gets back to the first thing we were talking about in terms of like, okay, what are you consistently thinking about yourself? How do you label yourself, and how those things end up being, basically
Right.
manifesting into reality the more you use them,
Yeah.
the more
Yeah.
one uses them.
Yeah. I mean, the most basic, immediate way that most people know how to do very well, um, of manifesting your thoughts into a physical form, are speaking, right? That's to do the act of
Yeah,
speech, to make the sound vibrations, to bring that
yeah,
that concept that's deep in consciousness, that is sort of not named when you think about it. You can have thoughts that are sort of, that seem almost pre-verbal to you, and then you sort of bring it down and crystallize it into a speech form,
mhm,
which in a sense is a condensation of the concept as you had it, without words in your mind. So there's got to be some sort of compromise as you squeeze it down into a word, and yet at the same time, it's it's a much more revealed format, right? The thought in your mind, it's not just hidden to other people, but even to yourself. There's something like, once you speak an idea that you have, even you understand it better. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely.
And
Yes,
certainly
and
you can't
very
yeah,
true.
you can't record it unless you do that. So through condensed compromise of concept into speech, um, you're you're also really actually revealing what it is. It's a little bit of a paradox
Mhm,
in that. But
mhm,
there's the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, who's a great Hasidic master I'm really into. There's a whole thing about this, like bringing an idea down into speech and like what's really going on. And he posits that the words that you're going to actually end up using, the words that you're going to speak, are sort of present on an unconscious level before you apprehend the thing that you're thinking about. So like in the depths of your unconscious wisdom, right? Your unconscious mind is vastly wise and connected to all of reality, and knows this.
yeah,
And you've got this sort of
mm,
almost Freudian idea of like the conscious tip of the iceberg with this big unconscious. But this unconscious mind is
mm,
vastly powerful and creative, and it already has the words for the concept. And it's just this process of it passing into your conscious awareness before you then manifest it into the physical speech, where it goes through this sort of lapse of not having the words associated with it. And so when you speak it again, you're actually revealing that original essence again. Because in the vast wisdom of your unconscious mind, you already know all things like this. You know what you're going to say.
mm, mhm.
You already made the decision on a very deep level. And it only kind of seems to you like you have to think about it and then say it. And so really that compromise that you have to make, that sort of feeling like you have to give something up when you're bringing it down from your mind into your speech, is an illusion. And the truth
Mhm,
is that it really is fully revealed only in speech and never just in the mind. And I think this relates very closely to the idea that you're trying to get at here, with like what it means to manifest a thought, and like whether there needs
mhm,
to be a compromise in that process. And I said, like, well, I do think there needs to be a compromise with the partner, but at the same time, there's this, we do, with speech as just an immediate example that everybody's familiar with. We can see this process and how it unfolds, and how it's actually possible to take something from deep within the self and make it a physical reality, even if it's just making an idea comprehensible to the self and others. That makes sense.
mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that description. This is something that I think about a ton in my work, is the power of the subconscious, and how so much of what actually manifests in our lives is simply a result of that, as you said, vast wisdom of the subconscious, the unconscious, as opposed to us just thinking, thinking about what we want and getting it necessarily. It's more so like, what what is the unconscious bringing forth into the conscious that is already programmed deep within.
Mhm.
And I think this is
Mhm.
actually a good segue into the topic that we discussed previously about moving from this sort of collective paradigm of scarcity into a collective paradigm of abundance.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because so
Yeah.
much of that is coming from that unconscious, you know, from the programming that we're not even totally aware of, having been descendant of people from so many generations who were really, you know, seemed to be very much in the presence of scarcity a lot of the time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So that program is deep within.
I think it's like the great challenge that we face as a species right now, is managing the
Mhm.
fact that, um, if we're not there already, we're very close to living in a sort of post-scarcity world, in the sense that there are enough resources to go around. I think
Mhm.
we've been there for quite some time. I think
Yeah.
certainly in a country such as this one, um, it's not necessary for everybody to be doing all the work that they're doing for us to have all the stuff that we have. Like, that's just a fact, right? I mean, if you think about the math of it.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the way we've sort of hoarded away certain pockets of extreme wealth have prevented the sort of the flow of abundance throughout society properly. So I think as a whole, on a societal economic level, we need to work that out. But I think it really affects every sort of aspect, because and I don't think, it's because I do think there's some evil, greedy people out there, but I think in general, humans have evolved in a situation of scarcity. Like, there was a time, um, about 60,000 years ago, where the entire human population, I think this is true, I read this a long time ago, so my numbers might be a bit off, but I think it said that about 60,000 years ago, the whole human population dropped down to 2,000 individuals who lived in sort of one sort of big valley in Africa. 2,000 individuals, right? So they witnessed an almost complete extinction of the human species. We lived through an ice age. We lived through, um, I mean, most of human existence was spent pre-agricultural, um, which might have been awesome in certain places and certain times, but the climate isn't always forgiving. And if you wander over into the wrong part of the world, you're facing very difficult living. And scarcity was the reality for which humanity was built, not just like physically, but psychologically. And then
Mhm.
we've overcome that through so many, of our ingenious advancements, and through our labor, and through our partnerships, and through, bringing our vision of reality into reality, being partners in creation, as we've been discussing. That's how we sort of created this vast superabundance that does exist in the world. We've brought that forth, um, and yet we're all still, maybe not all of us, but for the most part, most of our systems are still behaving as if we don't have that, and we still need to be vying for resources, and we still need to be. I mean, look, they're playing geopolitics still, right? They're like invading Ukraine and building nuclear weapons because they think like nation states are important. I mean, this is not the. I remember somebody, I don't remember who said it, but it's a great quote, that it's not that people lose their imaginations as they grow up, they just start to use it for really stupid things. Like, yeah, every you know repressive regime is built out of the imagination. Like, every soulless corporation is a product of the imagination. McDonald's isn't a real thing. Like, we imagined it, but that corporation has like an existence, and its activity has consequences because we sort of imagined it this way. Um, Once again, driven by this scarcity, driven by this idea that, like, no, we have to hoard things, and we have to sort of externalize costs, and it's okay if we're environmentally destructive and if we provide unhealthy food to people because we're trying to shore up this or that. Once again, I'm not just trying to blame McDonald's. Like, this is a human problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not their fault. They're
They're
doing a
like
little bit of
ridiculous,
damage, but
it's a group effort. um but um it's interesting how this plays over into other areas. Like, I'm obviously very interested in religion, spirituality. This YouTuber who I recommended to you, Zevi Slavin, over at Seekers of Unity, he said
Mhm.
something about we have to build a post-scarcity spirituality.
Mm.
And there's this thing where, those of us who practice religions, and I think even those of us who don't practice religions but have been exposed to religion, because at least in America we live in a very religious society, have intense feelings about the beliefs of others and the way other people experience truth and unity. And we often feel very threatened and dogmatic when we come against
Mhm.
ideas that seem at odds with ours, rather than, once again, trying to find that deeper unity underneath. And like, I'm guilty of this too. Like, it's very difficult for me to listen to certain Christians, for example, preaching certain things and not feel like, oh, that's the other. I don't have any spiritual kinship with this person, or to be
Mm.
offended by things that they say about my spirituality, which I hear some people don't
Right.
like. But
Yeah.
but once again, that's playing that scarcity game where it's like, no, there's enough God to go around, man. Like, I don't need to just say, like, I need to hoard all the God in my religion.
There's more than enough. In fact, I would say there's an abundance.
Yeah, super abundance. And I think that's part of the same tendency. Like, we got into this uh, very antagonistic way of experiencing religion, partially because of this exact same tendency of having to hoard. In this case, hoarding the holy.
Right. Yeah, and there's that, and then there's also the motivations of certain humans who have decided to sort of use these concepts to do things like wage war or steal resources or whatever. Like, I feel like a lot of that is rooted in sort of like this tribalism and the desire to survive, and feeling like somebody who's within your tribe is a safe person to be around and listen to, and if somebody is in the other tribe, they're inherently a threat, because
Right.
that has been the case for so long.
Exactly.
So there's that's like deep in our programming as well.
Right. And that brings up something very interesting, because, okay, so this is what we've got. We're programmed with this tribalism. So is the answer to say, okay, I'm not going to be tribal? Well, I think when people try that, they still end up being tribal. They fall into their sort of non-tribal tribes of whatever,
No tribe.
yeah, either a political alignment or some sort of whatever it is, right? Instead of it being an ethnic or religious thing. But I think, even politics, people understand that to be tribal. But it's very hard to avoid the idea of, this is my group. It's very hard to actually say my tribe is all of humanity. Although, on a certain level, we really should be working towards that. But I think at the same time, it's okay to recognize our own cultural identities, and 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 we should, and
Yeah,
we should
sure.
whatever, if it's not once again a religious or ethnic concept of culture, but it's okay to say, like, well, I'm a hippie, that's my tribal identity, these are my people, I go to the rainbow gathering, and like, that's my whatever it is, right? To have
You
your
talking about
people
me?
yeah, I mean, you go to Burning Man, right? Not Rainbow, but right? Or you do go to Rainbow? I don't know.
I have been. The Rainbow Gathering was one of the first festivals I ever went to, actually. But More recently Burning Man for sure. Yeah, I think I want to say something about that quickly. Were you done?
I just wanted to say that like we should seek to have a healthy tribal experience instead of trying to delete the tribal experience. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say. I mean, I feel that there's room for both. I think it's super important, and I love being around people who like what I like and who believe what I believe and who I feel comfortable around. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the human experience, is to be able to have these, collective identities. And I think that so many of those can exist within the big collective identity of being a human being on Earth. And in my belief, and yours as well, being a child of God. And I think there's unity within the duality always.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's vitally important. The any kind of monoculture is any kind of just saying, we're what am I trying to say here? That in the way we've had it set up, people have those tribal identities, they're comfortable with them, they love them, they're in them, and then they come into conflict with other tribes. And it's really in that space that we have a lot of work to do, in the what's going on between tribes. But within I mean, look, today's election day, and the the tribes of American politics are on the verge of things just devolving into actual physicalized conflict.
Yeah,
it's intense, and it's scary. It's a scary day. Yeah, here exactly we're seeing this sort of we've got people who live sort of in a more traditional way and feel very threatened by people who live in a less traditional way, and we have people who are rural who feel threatened by urban people, and vice versa. They feel mutual threat from one another. And we have, I don't know, like we could go on and on and on, but right now in America, people are feeling very wary of one another on so many levels. Everybody's aware of what tribes they fall into vis-a-vis economics, and what just happened with the pandemic, and what should happen politically, and what's going on globally, and labor questions and environmental questions, and like we could go on and on. Very important social questions. Whether people are allowed to choose their own identities on a basic level. I mean, really, really intense questions are going on. So this is something we need to learn very quickly.
Right. Yeah, and it seems to be intensifying. I mean, my fundamental belief around it is always around this idea of coexisting and having tolerance. It's like, do no harm at the basic level. And I think, even when it comes down to that, it's like we have arguments about what is harm and who is being affected by what. Although I think this is a rabbit hole. I know we're running a little short on time, and I don't want to go too far into this rabbit hole.
But yeah, just
I would like to.
The only reason I went in this direction is just this idea of like the mutual respect of identity is also something that that is we have to come out of that scarcity mindset into, like the scarcity of identity. If you're you, then how can I be me? It's kind of a question we start asking each other right now, which is silly, but it's really, how many me's can there be? And on that note, and I do want to move on, and this is spiritual. There's something from Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, another great Hasidic master, who said that this is something about scarcity here, that there's not enough respect for honor, depending on how you want to translate that. There's not enough honor in the world for even a single person, which is a very moving statement, I think. The idea that everybody is so deeply deserving of respect, and everybody's humanity deserves to be honored, and it's not possible to do that enough for somebody. You know, we always have to be striving to give everybody as much honor and respect as humanly possible, because like you'll never.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful starting point. And yeah, you know, moving forward with the concepts of gratitude and understanding the abundance of nature and the abundance of God's creation. I think also, like, what I'd like to get into for the last couple of minutes here are like practical tools. Like, so okay, if we want to think about on an individual level moving from a state of scarcity to a state of abundance, how do we get started with this?
Great question. That's a great question. And I think, you know, if you look at a lot of the great spiritual masters and the kind of advice they were giving people on how to hone their consciousness, a lot of that is very relevant here. So I'm just going to give you one little kind of spiritual framework of how to hone the self that I think is relevant. But I think, you know, certainly most great enlightened masters were trying to teach people this. Part of what I think enlightenment is really that next stage of evolution, that sort of post-scarcity place. That understanding of unity is really closely related to that idea of abundance. And that's what I think the enlightened are tapping into. That said, I also think that it's complicated, because I think it's possible to be enlightened and immoral. So I think, you know, you can see that and fall back from it, and sort of still have those great insights, but forget about the pure abundance and start to hoard religion again. Right? Even some enlightened people do it. But I digress. The practical question. The basic premise of this book called Tanya, which is the foundational text of Chabad Hasidus, and it's really one of the sort of streams of mystical thought or Hasidic thought that's really influential to my outlook. The basic premise of that book is that as a human, you have a base part of yourself that's called the animal soul, and you have an exalted part of yourself that's called the godly soul. And as somebody who wants to strive upwards, you also have this other thing associated with the body that wants to just sort of indulge and engage in the most sort of immediate gratification kind of stuff. And that those are both there. And that really almost nobody succeeds in like shutting up and subjugating that lower animal self. So you shouldn't even really try. It's an interesting idea. You should try to make them work together. You should try to trick your animal self, or not even trick it, train it to want the same thing that your higher self wants, which can take time, but it's possible. But it's understanding that you kind of stand between these two drives, and that you know which one is which in you. You know which is your higher calling, which is like your higher truth, and what's sort of just for the moment, what's just immediate. And those two things can absolutely line up, right? Like in the moment, my immediate basic animal instinct is that I want to cuddle this kid, right? my circuitry wants me to do it. The same brain that makes me like want to eat food that's not healthy for me or something like that is the same brain that's programming me to like want this. And my higher self thinks that I should cuddle this baby, but also thinks I should eat healthy. You know, so it's at odds there, and it's not at odds here. So the game is to like try to bring it more and more in alignment, and understand that your lower drives aren't necessarily bad or negative. They might just be misplaced and misdirected, and that everything that your animal soul wants. This is a very interesting concept in Hasidus. God created all of the capacities for all of your desires. And so at their root, none of them are bad. It's just the way that you've learned to fulfill them sometimes is wrong. So like, we don't have the idea of confession in Judaism, but there's still this idea, if you want to unburden yourself about a sin you committed, you might go to your spiritual teacher and tell him what you did, and ask him for advice about how to make it right. Not that he'll offer you some absolution, but he can advise you about how to make it right, whether you sinned against God or another person. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of these great masters, said that whenever somebody came to him and told him about a sin that they'd committed, before he answered them, he'd look deep within himself and he'd look for the place in himself where he had a desire that could potentially lead to committing an act like that. Even if never in a million years would he, sexually violate someone or be violent with a person or steal something, he sees that desire at the root of himself, that, that lust or that anger or that whatever, even if he's a very saintly person who can control those things. He sees how, well, in another context, if I weren't me, whatever, but this is the root of that feeling. And I can at least, I see that desire going that way. And then he can answer them based on that. He said that once, somebody said something and it took him a few minutes to find that place in himself. I was curious about, like, well, what the heck was that, But
yeah, that makes sense.
But still, this idea that, like, your desire for that kind of food, or your desire for something sexual, or your desire for an altered state of consciousness, or whatever it is that somebody might want to correct and suppress and put in the right place for themselves. It's not that the desire is wrong, it's that the expression isn't in line with that higher will. So finding a way to not, I said earlier, to trick the animal soul. It's not to trick it, it's to give it what it wants, but in the right way, in the way that is in harmony with that higher drive. And so that's the balance to seek. It's not to sort of lord one over the other and suppress it. It's to bring the fulfillment of that lower drive into alignment with the fulfillment of your higher drive. And that's really the premise of this book, Tanya. But just having said that, that's already a lot to think about. And he gives a lot of methods for that and a lot of sort of mystical theory of mind below the surface of how it all fits together and whatever. But he says that in, like, the first chapter or two, what I just said, basically. And that's the work that I would recommend people do to overcome the scarcity mindset.
Okay.
Because it's very related.
So,
it's very related. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. We go for another 10 minutes.
Okay, I was going to say we're running out of time here. I think just to confirm what you just said, I mean, one thing I'm hearing about that is it's like acceptance and integration of that animal self, in a sense, because I think a lot of people, what their issue is almost like shunning and rejecting that part of them, and then still behaving in those ways, but feeling, shame or guilt or whatever about it.
Precisely, because it's so out of whack with what they feel like they really want, that with what that higher will is. Exactly.
Yeah. And then integration, understanding how we can, channel those desires in a way that is in alignment with the higher self for the manifestation of all good things.
Right. And this remembering that the animal is not evil; it's a partner in it. And it's not
exactly. Yeah.
Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic philosopher, used to call his body brother ass.
Brother ass, did you say?
Yeah, brother ass, exactly. Because he was a monk, so like
brother,
brother
donkey?
John over there. Exactly. You got brother John over there, and brother Paul, and here's brother donkey, my body. But there it's like, but they're just to pull on a Christian symbol for a second to prove that I'm trying to get over my abundance issues. We also have this image of the Messiah coming riding on a donkey, right? This idea of something very high that comes in on something very low. um, yeah, that brother ass is carrying something beautiful. You know, the mind and the body really need each other. Like we were saying before,
Yeah,
they're not
absolutely.
actually that separate. So, um, yeah, the body is
Yeah,
not
that,
to be hated, and those desires are to be taken seriously. Sorry.
mhm. Yeah, one way I like to think about it is the body is an instrument of the mind.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And you can tell a lot about the nature of somebody's mind, the nature of their thoughts by the way that the body is presenting. You know, anything from like, you know, the surface level appearance of it to like the way that it moves or the expression of the eyes in particular. And as people grow older, like which places wrinkles show up even can give you an idea of the countenance of that mind that inhabit, you know, that has that body as an instrument, but
Mhm.
also that the mind body connection is an illusion because they're just are one and the same in a sense.
Mhm. Mhm. It's a continuum. We talk about in the Kabbalah we talk about 5 parts of the soul. Usually we talk about 3 of them because the top 2 are very difficult to understand, so we leave them out most of the time. So, but the 3 that we talk about, usually the lowest one, what's called the nefesh, is like this sort of vital life force that every animal has. Um, that's really like at a certain point indistinguishable from the body. Where like it's very hard to tell where the body begins and the nefesh ends. I think the mind extends from that highest point of the soul all through all parts of the soul and into the body. Your body is participating in the mind, absolutely. But it's interesting to distinguish maybe soul from mind, but to also acknowledge that sort of most fundamental life force part of soul that every living thing has, um, very subtly different from the body, but very, very subtly. If that
Mm-hmm.
makes any sense.
Awesome. Well, I want to dive into that with you in the future, but
Yes,
we're
I
gonna have to
anticipate it.
wrap it for today and pick it up next time. So thank you so much, Karel. It's been a pleasure speaking with you always, and I look forward
Likewise,
to the next round.
very much so, very much so.
All right. Any parting words, or are you feeling good?
Parting words on the recording still.
Yes.
Yeah, let's give it one parting thought here. Um, you asked me for a story before about connecting the idea of what's good for the self, what's good with the many. So I really want to give you one of those. Um,
Mm.
so here's an interesting one. It's just the first one that came to mind, but I'll explain it afterwards. So the guy who wrote the Tanya, the book that talks about the animal soul and the godly soul and finding that balance, he was a disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a really influential teacher, one of the most influential religious teachers in Judaism in the last few hundred years, by far, deeply enlightened being. And after the Maggid died, he was one of the youngest of those students, so he continued to study with the older ones and eventually sort of moved back to his hometown. And he was a scholar and he studied and whatever, the rabbi. And in those days, a rabbi didn't really give sermons and teaching so much. A rabbi did like functional stuff. You know, you bring him your chicken and you ask him if you slaughtered it properly. And he could tell you like if
Mm.
it's kosher or not, you know, stuff like that. Where you didn't have people who had books and they could look up the rules. And so you had this guy in town who really knew the rules. And then he could help officiate at the synagogue and stuff like that. And that was his role much more than like a spiritual teacher most of the time. So he was doing this, but people in the town kept coming to him and wanted him to give spiritual teaching. And they started showing up night after night. And eventually like crowds were showing up of the town folk, like standing outside, really wanting him to teach. And all he wanted to do in his spare time was sit and learn the holy books. and continue this method that he had learned from the Maggid and the other holy students. And he said to his wife, "Why don't these people leave me alone? All I want to do is sit here and learn. What do they think? That I'm something special? That I should teach them something?" And his wife said, "What are you, arrogant? It's not about you. It's not that they think you're special. They know that you studied with the holy Maggid of Mezrich. They know that you learned from his holy students, and they want to know what he said. So you have to go tell them. It's not for you to hoard this information. It's not about you." So he accepted that his wife was right and began to teach. And he ended up founding this Hasidic dynasty that's like one of the most important expositions of Hasidism in the world, and that's brought like Torah and enlightenment and beauty to so many people, and has just really been one of the most powerful forces in his own right. But it started off with that accepting that what the many were demanding of him is what he should do, and it actually ended up being the correct thing for him. And the thing is, what was getting in his way is exactly his arrogance. And it's an interesting arrogance because it's an arrogance that hindered him. Instead of sometimes arrogance like pushes you forward and makes you like a go-getter, and like, I deserve so much, so I'm going to get everything done better and the best. But there's an arrogance. So there's a holy arrogance. There's a good arrogance. There's also an arrogance that's like, I want to keep everything for myself. I want to keep my wisdom for myself. I want to keep what I understand for myself because I'm the recipient of the beauty of the world. And I'm the one who can see these things. And I'm the one who can study these things. I'm the one who gets to understand these things. Everything that we're taught is only so that we can pass it on, so that we can teach it, so we can give it to others. But it's in that we actually find the fulfillment of why we learned it in the first place. Back to that idea of you don't understand it till you say it. You don't understand your own ideas till you say it. How much more can you understand what you learn from somebody else until you teach it? And the same thing goes for the abundance we receive. There's no way for us to enjoy it unless we pass it on. This is a very deep idea in Judaism. I really want to just sum up with this. Very deep idea in Judaism that wealth is given to us so that we can give it to others. That every measure of wealth that's put in your hands is entrusted to you as a steward. And it's through your responsible stewardship that you're entrusted with it. And not every steward is actually going to behave responsibly with what's put in their hands, but when it is put in their hands, they do have this responsibility to do justly with it and to share it and to make sure that abundance flows through them and isn't just being hoarded in them. If that makes sense. Because it's those sort of points where the hoarding happens that the partnerships with others start to break down. You know, this trust that if you let it flow on, that it will continue to flow to you, and that the reason it came to you is that you could share it in the first place, means that it will continue to come to you in droves if you become a conduit for that abundance, right? If it passes through you, yes, you get to participate and enjoy it as well. So don't be the end of the chain. Don't be the bottom collecting it all. Be part of the transmission. You can enjoy the abundance as it flows through you, but let it go on, and then you too will be like the Rebbe who's passing the teachings that came from him to the next generation, so they can flow and not hoard it.
Beautiful. That was perfect. Thank you for that. That's truly one of the secrets, I believe, to manifesting abundance.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Karel.
Thank you, Alec. And,
we will see you soon.
Yes, indeed.
I'll just